Good morning. Good to see you guys. Do you have a good week? Well, who could argue with that? Man, whatever you guys are taking, give me some. Well, I won't torment you any further. Let me invite you to turn to John 15. While you're doing that, let me just mention a couple things. Many of you folks have mentioned you'd like more information about becoming a member, and I think this is all in the bulletin, but we have a Discovering Prescott class scheduled to start basically the week after the Labor Day weekend, thinking it might be foolish to try to start on Labor Day weekend. So I think that's the 11th. If you're interested in becoming a member or just curious, what makes you guys tick? What's special about Prescott? That sort of thing. That is a class for you. And we describe this is who we are, this is what we're all about, and it gives God a chance to speak to you whether this ought to be your church home. Second thing I wanted to mention is we had our organizational meeting for after school last week, and we got everything in line. Now it's just a matter of waiting until September 7th when we kick it off and get the students in there and kind of get the program up and running. Couple ways you can help, and I think this is in the bulletin as well. We're always in need of like snacks and that kind of stuff, and you can see Karen Habecker about that, and if you'd like to donate snacks, that would be great. What would be really helpful is we'd like to get a list of people that we could call on as subs. You may not be in a position where, oh, I can make a commitment and be there, for the entire program. But you may be able to say, you know what? When people are traveling or something happens in someone's schedule and they can't make it, I'd be willing to at least get a phone call and agree to be on a sub list so that, say, Tony can't come one week or Sharon can't come one week, we can make a phone call and say, hey, you're the next person on the list. Can you make it? Here's the hours. Here's the time. And you could always reserve the privilege of saying, well, no, I can't make it. And we'll just call the next person and the next person. But what that would do is it would help us guard all of our regulars from burnout. Because it's a big commitment. And Monday, Wednesday, Friday, on Monday and Friday, you're looking at 2 hours. On Wednesday, it's 1:30 to 5, so 3.5 hours. That's a big commitment to make, and we don't want to burn those people out. And often when someone is traveling or can't make it, they end up being the one that fills in, and so they're doing double duty. And anyway, I think you get the point. If you would be able to be on that sub list so that we can call you, I'd very much appreciate it. Shoot me an email. If you have my number, text me. If you don't have my number, I'll give it to you. And I can send you fish pictures because Greg loves when I send him fish pictures. And I will. I left my phone sitting there. I would have sent you one right now, but it's sitting on my desk. I'll send you one later. And you can put something in the bulletin and those like communication cards. Any way you can communicate, hey, I'd be willing to be on the sub list. If I don't have your number, give me your number. If I have your number, just say, hey, I'm willing to be on the list. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into the Word. We are in the midst of a new series. I think this might be week 4. But the whole focus of the series is we're trying to learn to live like Jesus. We've called it incarnational Christianity because when Christ was on earth, that is the incarnation, well, when he was on earth, he fleshed out what it means to actually live like Jesus. He gave us a glimpse into how he operated, what he thought, kind of things he would say, the kind of things he would do. We get a sense of what he is like. And the problem we face, the struggle we face, is living like Jesus in the broken world, in our broken bodies, amongst broken people. It's not all that easy. And as a result, oftentimes we Christians fail to really focus on Christ-likeness. We often settle for what I might call cheap substitutes. We know we're to be different. Being like Jesus is different, but being like Jesus is sometimes very, very hard. And so we settle for, and we called it pseudo-transformation. We settle for other behaviors that Christians do, that people expect Christians do. Christians go to church. Christians go to Bible studies. Christians are involved in ministries. And so instead of really focusing on Christ-likeness, we settle for those substitutes. And often those substitutes are mechanical and externally oriented or drift into legalism. We've talked about all of those things. And that's why we're doing this series. We're trying to prevent the idea that we would settle for a cheap substitute. And so in week 1, we started by focusing on, well, what does it actually mean to be born again? And the idea of being born again means I become a new creation of God. And that old self, the old Vince disappears and a whole new self begins to emerge. And guess what? That new self is based and modeled on Jesus himself. From there, we explored, well, what in the world does true spirituality mean? How do we know if we're making progress? And the essence of true spirituality is where we get to that place where more and more Christ is able to actually live through me. So that out of my mouth is coming the kind of things that Jesus would say. And my behaviors are mimicking the kind of things that Jesus would do. And I'm demonstrating the qualities and the characteristics that we see in Jesus in the Gospels. And Jesus is actually living through me. Last week we focused, we started looking at 5 G's that will help us achieve Christ-likeness, and we started with grace, and we did so because as we pursue Christ-likeness, grace is very, very necessary. It guards against drifting into things like legalism, and at the same time, it's the only place I know where we will be able to experience the life Jesus wants us to experience, which is life to its very full. This morning we moved to G number 2, where we're going to focus on growth. We focused on grace last week. We're going to focus on growth because focusing on Christ-likeness really is a rest of our life journey. And it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen easily. And it's not going to happen as we try harder. And that's a mentality that we often have. We just need to try harder. We find ourselves in a situation where maybe we should have forgiven, or maybe we should have been patient, or maybe we should have been more gracious and loving, and we blow it. And what do? Our instinct is to say, well, I got to try harder. Becoming more and more like Christ will not happen as we try harder. It will happen as we engage in spiritual training. And by spiritual training, I'm talking about engaging in intentional practices, experiences, and developing relationships that will result in my growth. And a great way to understand that process, that pathway, if you will, is what we're going to focus in on this morning. We're going to call it the apprentice model. An apprentice, Let me see. There it is. An apprentice is someone who's learning a trade from some skilled employer. It's a practice that's rooted back in ancient times, but it's something that's still practiced today. We don't often call them apprentices, although the term is still used. Often we'll use the term intern. But even in the trades today, a plumber, an electrician, someone in construction, someone that works in like an automobile mechanic repair shop, they will bring someone in, and that someone will learn the trade not by going to school, not by going to a class. They will learn the trade on the job. They will work with this skilled tradesman, and that skilled tradesman will mentor them along so that they themselves become that skilled tradesman. And if you think about it, being an apprentice is remarkably similar to Jesus' relationship with the 12. We could honestly say the 12 apostles or the 12 disciples, whichever term you prefer, they were basically apprentices of Jesus. They were experiencing on-the-job training with the goal that they would become just like Christ. And we kind of see that process in their lives through 4 invitations that Christ gave them very early. John chapter 1, it's about verse 39 or so. We have some disciples of John the Baptist that is, and they hear John refer to Jesus as the Lamb of God who would take away the sin of the world. And they're curious, and they're wondering, who is this guy? Could he possibly be the Messiah? And they came to Christ, and Christ said, "Come and see." As his fame began to spread and followers more and more were attracted to me, there came a time when he said to them, "Come and follow me, I will make you fishers of men." But they're still not permanently with Jesus. That came later at a time when he was ready to bring those guys into that intentional, systematic training. And so he went up into the mountains, he prayed, he called 12 of them to come and be with him in a very close, intimate relationship where basically for the next 2.5 to 3 years, they lived with him. And where Jesus went, they went. And what Jesus did, they did. And he was mentoring them. He was the master. They were the apprentice. And very near the end of his ministry, I don't know if he felt they were ready, but it might have been one of those things, ready or not, here we go. He called them to remain in him, as the branch cannot bear fruit unless it's attached to the vine. You cannot bear fruit unless you're attached to me. You must remain in me, I must remain in you, and that is when you will be successful. And so this morning, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the whole idea of spiritual growth, but we're going to look at it through the lens of this apprenticing model. And we start in John 15 because this is where I think we see that model described. Very near the end of his ministry. In fact, this is the night he's going to be arrested. He's teaching his disciples, preparing them for what's about to come. I am the true vine, my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes it so that it will be even more fruitful. Now, you are already clean. You're already pruned because of the word that I have spoken to you. Remain in me, as I also remain in you. And that's the essence of where we're going. Because no branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you do in fact remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. but apart from me, you can do nothing. The essence that we're shooting for, and we might call it a with God approach or a with Jesus approach to life, is this idea that Christ described as remain in me and I remain in you. Paul described it as I've been crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, yet it's really not me, it is Christ living in me. That's the essence of this apprentice model, but I want to flesh it out a little bit more, and I want to do that by raising some questions. What is being an apprentice like? How did that work? Well, if we could go back to medieval times, what would happen is usually you'd have people out in the rural countryside where there was little opportunity for them, and they would move into the big city, and whether they were a man or a woman, they would enter into an apprenticing relationship with a master who would train them in some trade. And if we just stop and pause there, and we ask the question, well, how does that compare to Jesus' call in our life? Well, first of all, he calls us to leave our past behind when we come to him. He offers us a new life, and in that new life, the goal is that we would become like him. We would learn from him so that we can become like him. So we die to self and we die to our past so that we can become this new person that in that relationship with Christ as our mentor, we become like him. So it's an exact parallel. So the young person, man or woman, they'd come to the city, they'd enter into this apprenticing relationship, and in that relationship, they would be totally immersed into the life of the master. They would be learning to do what the master did through hands-on training. And the apprentice would basically become a part of the master's family. He would eat with them. He'd either sleep in the shop or he'd sleep in the home of the master. And all day long, what would he be doing? He'd be spending his time working alongside of the master. This on-the-job training. And if you think about it, when the relationship first starts out, they're relative strangers to each other. And that apprentice is totally and completely dependent on the master, and the master's job was to train them so that they could become a master themselves. They held nothing back. They didn't hang on to some trade secret that would inhibit that person from achieving the level that he would need to be a master himself. No, the whole idea was the master was training the apprentice to become a master, which is exactly what Jesus did. And that's why we saw that progression. Come and see, come and follow me. Now come and be with me. Leave your past. Where I go, you go. What I do, you do. You live with me. You sleep with me. You eat with me. We spend time together, and in the process, you will discover what it means to be like Jesus. It's a with God, with Jesus approach to Christianity. And it's very different from what we might call a traditional discipleship program. In fact, in a lot of churches, especially larger churches, they will have a whole segment of their ministry that they'll label discipleship. And most of those discipleship programs revolve around what I would say the head and the body. They focus on learning, so there's always some curriculum, there's always some Bible study, and I'm not opposed to any of that, but there's always some curriculum where you learn, it deals with your mind, and then there are always things that you are to do. And again, I'm not saying those things are bad or wrong, but I am saying they easily lend themselves to a very mechanical and a very compartmentalized approach to life. So that I take the class, I do these things, it must mean I have spiritually grown. And we segment those aspects of our life that we deem spiritual into a spiritual bucket, and the rest of our life we live, and never the twain shall meet. And that is not what the apprentice model is like at all. The apprentice model revolves around your heart, and the goal is to learn to live with God, being a very real, a very present, a very intimate part of your life 24/7. Why? Because God isn't interested in our spiritual life, as if that was separate from the rest of our life. He's interested in the entirety of our life. He's interested in 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Not just Sunday morning, not just when your Bible study meets, not when your ministry activity takes place. He's interested in the whole thing. Even the routine daily stuff. He wants to spend the day with you, and maybe more importantly, he wants you to spend the day conscious that he is right there with you. And when we get to where we're doing that, Bill Hull, a guy connected to TNet from way back, used to always say, people don't do what you expect. People do what you inspect. And that is absolutely true. And that's why the apprentice model works really good. Because if you think of the Western model where a lot of our learning takes place in a classroom. So in a classroom, your class is meeting, the teacher is there, and everybody is on their best behavior, and then class dismissed. And every single one of us know for a fact from personal experience, when class is dismissed, the students are no longer on their best behavior. I know that because I once was a student. And I knew how to behave when I was being observed. And I really knew how to misbehave when I wasn't. And that is true of absolutely all of us. But when your approach to life is, I am living with God and God is living with me, I'm remaining in him and he is remaining in me, there's never a time when I am not in his presence. And when I live with that as a conscious reality and I am intentionally living that way, what is going to happen? It's going to change the way I think. It's going to change the things I say. It's going to change the things I do. And I'm going to find myself more and more and more becoming like Jesus. Now, as we continue on, in this model, there's an emphasis on training versus trying. And we've talked about this before. We're going to talk about it some more this morning. Maybe in a little bit different light, but we're going to talk about it some more. We start with a couple scriptures, 1 Corinthians 9. Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, only one gets the prize? So I want you to run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. Now they do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, and this is Paul speaking, his application personally, therefore I don't run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer who's beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body. I make my body my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified from the prize. Now he's giving us an analogy from what is called the Isthmian Games, because he's writing to Corinth, and Corinth was where the Isthmian Games took place. They were the forerunners to what we now call the Olympics. And he says every athlete that takes part in the Isthmian Games goes into strict training because they know training is the gateway to success. And that is absolutely true in athletics. I don't know if all of you know, I know many of you know Greg is a bike rider. How many miles did you ride this week? Okay, 220. What's the longest ride you ever took? In one day, right? Okay, go back to the first day you got on the bike. I was going to say, could you go 117 miles back then? No, you could go 2 times around your block and you just about die. That reminds me of when my son talked me into buying a motorcycle. I probably shouldn't do this. Well, no, I had never ridden the motorcycle. I had ridden as a passenger on a motorcycle 3 times. And I did not have a motorcycle license yet. But we bought an old Honda. First, my son wanted me. He took me to Indian and Harley shops and wanted me to buy a $30,000 motorcycle that I have not ridden in my whole life. I said, no, Vinny, we're going to go find like a $400 or $500 motorcycle that if I crash it, it doesn't matter, except if I get hurt. So anyway, we get it home. It's sitting in the driveway. I've never ridden one. I said, Vinny, I don't have my license yet, but I got to learn sometime. I'm going to go around the block. And so I get on it. I go to the edge of my driveway. And here comes the Royal Oak Police right across Woodward Avenue, right past my house, and I see them. And I realize I don't have a license, and I don't know what I'm doing, so I panicked. You know what happens when you stop on a motorcycle? If you don't, like, hold it up, it falls down. I didn't know that at the time. And so as the cop was going by and I was panicking, the bike fell down. Needless to say, the officer was curious. And well, that's the end of that story. But the point is, the first day Greg got on that bike, he couldn't have gone 117 miles. But through training, he has gotten to the place where he can. Because training will allow me to do something in the future that I presently am not able to do, and it doesn't matter how hard I try, I am not able to do it, but training will allow me to get to that place. And the same is true spiritually. Right now, I have limits on how loving I can be. I have limits on how patient I can be. I have limits on how forgiving I can be, how compassionate I can be, how merciful I can be, how much peace I can experience. Right now, if you put yourself in Jesus' shoes, right? They're nailing me to a cross. They've beaten me mercilessly. Do you think, I know this isn't true of me. I could not say, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. I could see myself saying, Father, get one of those lightning bolts ready and give it to them. But I have limits. You have limits. By entering into spiritual training, again, intentionally engaging in practices and experiences and developing relationships, by intentionally doing that sort of thing, I can expand or I can stretch my limits. I can grow to become more like Christ. And that's exactly what Paul tells Timothy to do. Timothy, have nothing to do with godless myth and old wives' tales. Instead, train yourself to be godly. Now, why in the world did he tell us to train ourselves to be godly if we cannot train ourselves to be godly? That would make absolutely no sense. Physical training is of some value, but godliness has value for all things because it holds the promise both of the present life and to life to come. And so we have a direct challenge. Train yourself to be godly. Well, what does that look like? How does that work? Well, I would suggest it's a combination of three things: knowing, doing, and most importantly, being. And we'll start with knowing, because knowing is very important. If you go back to the trades, plumbers know stuff that I don't know. Electricians know stuff that I don't know. When I take my car to the mechanic, they know stuff that I don't know. Construction people know stuff that the common ordinary person does not know. Knowing is very, very important. I had a really painful lesson in that fact earlier this year. We had a clogged toilet. And I thought, well, how difficult could it be to clear a clogged toilet? Because we've had them before, and usually a plunger would work, but a plunger wasn't working this time. And here's the first mistake I made. Mistake number one, I watched a YouTube video. And there was a certified plumber on there telling me, hey, it could only be one of two things. Either you have a clog in the line or your vent pipe is clogged. And so David Fisher had a snake, and I borrowed his snake, and I snaked it out, and the clog didn't fix. And so what else could it be? My vent must be clogged, right? Because YouTube told me. And the guy on YouTube said, here's how you clear your vent. You take your hose, you put it in the vent, you turn the water on, it'll flush out the clog. And you'll only know you're having a problem if the water comes up through the vent. And everybody knows everything you read and see on the internet is absolutely true. And so that's what I did. And I ran the water, and it did not come up. And I thought I solved the problem. Right up until I went in my bathroom and found out the water I was putting down the vent went down the vent, into the pipe, hit the clog, started to go in reverse, came out of my toilet, and I flooded the bathroom. Then you have to explain what happened to your wife. And that's always painful. But I did learn a valuable lesson. Plumbers know stuff that I don't know. Next time you have one of those problems, you know what you do? You call the plumber. Because it's easier. They fix it. Called the plumber, problem solved. Probably took him all of 15 minutes to fix the problem. And it was much better than dealing with the mess. The point is, when we look at becoming Christ-like, there's certain things that as followers of Jesus we ought to know. We ought to know the gospel. I mean, one of the most important things we are called to be as followers of Jesus are witnesses who share the good news that Jesus is the Savior, that he died, was buried, that he rose again, and he offers us all new life. We should know the gospel. We should know sound doctrine so that we don't get carried away in all the misinformation that's out there spiritually. We should know godly values and godly morals and godly ethics so we can function in this world with a Christian worldview. But knowing has limited value. Simply knowing, simply accumulating more and more Bible knowledge is not the equivalent of spiritual growth or spiritual maturity. We learned that earlier in our study. The Bible calls us to be doers of the word, not just hearers only. And the same is true of an apprentice. That's why they learn hands-on. It's one thing to sit in a class, listen to a lecture, and have a teacher explain things. It's something else to do a project with them. You're right there. working with maybe an electrician and he's wiring up a circuit box. Have you ever done that? I kind of did, but I was the apprentice. And I had a friend, Walt Klingerman, and he showed me, okay, I got to do the stuff like, here's the drill with that drill bit, and you get to drill the hole in the 2x8s or whatever they were so that he could run the wires through there to get to the circuit box. Well, I learned a lot of stuff by working with Walt. I've done different projects with my son, plumbing and things of that nature. Every single time I've done something with him, I've learned something. I've done stuff with some guys that were carpenters by trade. And every single time you learn stuff. It's like, how did you know that? And to them, it's common knowledge. But it's like, I never knew that. That's pretty cool. I'm going to remember that kind of stuff. When you work with someone, hands-on, getting that on-the-job training, you grow, you improve, you get better. So knowing is important. Doing is important. But we have to, again, be on guard because doing easily lends itself to a very compartmentalized. Remember, what are some of the things Christians do? Well, they go to church. Okay, I go to church. They go to Bible. Oh, I go to Bible study. They're involved in ministry. Oh, I'm involved in ministry. And it's very easy to have this mechanical, kind of a legalistic, externalist mindset where we start checking boxes and we start thinking, well, I must be Jesus-like because, look, I do all these things that Christians do. And we want to guard against that. And so what we really need to focus on is being, or better said, becoming. Because the ultimate goal of our training is what? To become more and more and more and more like Jesus. And we never arrive. It's a rest of our life process. No matter how Jesus-like you are today, a month from now, the goal is to be more Jesus-like. And this is the rest of our life process. And we've talked about this many times in the past. The reality, the idea of being or becoming is the idea of transformation, or it's the idea of what we might call character development. And character development goes something like this. If we go all the way back to where it begins, all day long, we are bombarded with data, with information. Some of it's good, some of it's not so good. But all day long, there's a steady stream of ideas that come our way. And some of them we grab a hold of, we latch on to because, well, that makes sense to me. I believe that. And so now we have a pool of stuff. We have all this stream of data, and we're gathering some of those things out as beliefs. And we've talked about this. There's a lot of things we believe, but we don't believe them enough to actually do them. We just believe they're true for someone else. I don't believe it enough to actually do it. So we now have a pool of beliefs. Out of that pool of beliefs, there's some things that I'm going to grab a hold of. I'm going to prioritize them as measured by, this is important, I'm actually going to do this. When you do something over and over and over again repeatedly, what do we begin to call that? A habit. And when you start doing things habitually, we begin to characterize people that way. Why do we call people honest? Because in our experience with them, they always tell the truth. We've never seen them misrepresent the truth. In our minds, they're honest. Okay, now our goal is to become like Jesus. Why beyond the fact that the Bible says God is love, why do we consider Jesus loving? exempt that fact, God is love, okay. Why do we consider Jesus loving? Yeah, because when we look in the Gospels, we see Jesus consistently loving people. We can't come up with any examples where Jesus didn't love people. So we think of Jesus as loving. He was habitually, consistently loving to the place where we've labeled him as loving. The idea of becoming is in this process of knowing and doing, we start habitually functioning like Jesus, so we become love as he is love. And our experience of joy increases despite what's going on, despite the circumstances, because joy isn't tied to my circumstances. Joy is tied to my relationship with Jesus. Happiness depends on what's happening, but not joy. Joy depends on my connection with Jesus Christ, which doesn't change, which constantly grows, so that no matter what I am experiencing as far as what's happening in my life, my joy can constantly be growing. As can my peace, as can my patience, as can my ability to forgive. It's not an event, it's not a class. It's a with God, with Jesus approach to life, where he's with me 24/7, like an apprentice was with the mentor 24/7, and it's on-the-job training. And it takes place over the course of the rest of our life. But that means we have to believe that we can actually become like Jesus. And I think there's a lot of people that have given up hope that that is true, because they've tried. And they've tried, and they've tried, and they've tried. And they've checked boxes, and they've gone to classes, and they've done the sort of things that they were told would deliver Christ-likeness, and it didn't work, and so they gave up, and they've settled for going to church and taking classes and serving in a ministry and then living disconnected from that. And I don't want you to give up, and I don't want you to settle for externalism or legalism. And that's a real danger, because living like Jesus is difficult. My body is against it. The world I live in is against it. The people that I'm surrounded by are all against it. So it's a real challenge. It takes time. It takes patience. It takes practice or training. There are no shortcuts. There are no easy steps. There are no magic pills. There's no pixie dust. There's no magic wands. Just a rest of our life journey where, as we get to this place where we are conscious and living in the reality that Christ is in us and we are in him. And there is nowhere I go, there is nothing that I do, there's nothing that I say that takes place apart from him. And we start thinking about the reality of, I want Christ to be able to live through me. So instead of my doing the living, he is living through me. And when we start approaching life that way, we will be changed, slowly but surely. Our thoughts will change. How we speak will change. Our behaviors will change. And little by little and more, he will be able to live through us. And that's the goal. Father, I pray that you would help us to get to that place where you actually are living through us, as Paul said, where I am crucified. Yet I'm alive, but it's not me, it is Christ living in me. Help us to get to that place. And one of the ways we can get to that place is by understanding this idea of being an apprentice, of having not a compartmentalized approach to my spirituality, but a whole life with God approach. Because you're concerned about my whole life, not just that spiritual part. You're concerned about the whole thing. And when I start living with that consciousness that you are ever present 24/7, it will change me. Apprentices became like their master in that relationship. The disciples became Jesus-like in their relationship with you. The same will happen to us if we relate to you in that way. And instead of compartmentalizing discipleship, we see it as a whole life. A life lived with you, with Jesus, where you can begin to live through us. Make it so in each of our lives, I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.